Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Okay, we're back again. You may recognize this place. But they're having a special event we're going to take you to. Open to the public.
People from Georgia here too.
Ooh, lost people. I know this is late. I meant to do the shout out before we left home, but didn't happen. We had a busy day and a long day, so I didn't get done. So I'm doing it now. I've got ducks. We're going to do our race real quick. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so it's for you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. It's going to be challenging here. Alright. There's Siege Stoll, M&J, Eve. Or no, I'm sorry, that's I, New, Rock, Hiking Ontario, Laura, Railroad, Mike's Garden, Sheena, Jackson, there's DG, there's Mountain Inspiration, there's Rowdy, Rock, there's John P, and there's Popcorn, and there's GOP3, there's Lower, there's Glitter, there's Stace, there's Days Adventures, there's Eric, there's Carnival, let's see, there's Popcorn, Duel, Shanster, Tammy, Walter, Frugal, Pugwall. I think it is going to be Mr. Pugwall. Hold on, Matt. Alright, this is Mr. Pugwall. Classic and horror movie media. Matt doing interviews, original trailers, reviews, live streams, and all that other stuff. Smash? I don't know. I like MASH. There's Mice. It does not have any shorts, but he got some really good content if you're into movies, classic horrors or otherwise, so check him out. Like, share, comment, and enjoy this video in dedication of Memorial Day, the Unknown Soldier. Hi.
All right, we're just at the very beginning here when I'm talking about the New York congressman named Hamilton Fish, who had introduced legislation to provide for an unknown soldier to be buried alive. Okay? So after they transported the bodies that they had selected and placed in the room, Younger was just standing off to the side, and the officer in charge walked to him and said, "Well, Younger, I guess you're it." "I'm what?" "You're it. You're going in there. You're going to select the unknown soldier." Okay. So he was given a spray of white roses. Now, I'm going to quote very loosely from his memoirs. He took the roses, he went into the room, and he said, "I stood there for a moment in awe of the task that I was about to perform. I was going to make history." He said, "I said a short prayer, and I walked around the coffins 3 times and was about to make a 4th circuit when," he said, "I felt compelled to stop in front of one of these coffins. It was like a voice was speaking to me saying, This may be a pal of yours. This could be somebody who stopped a bullet that was meant for you. So with that thought in his mind, he very reverently placed that spray of roses that he had been given on the second coffin from the left. And that made the selection of the World War I unknown soldier. The remaining three, since they were all mixed up and we didn't know what cemetery they came from, were simply reinterred in one cemetery. Now, the body that had been selected was taken out of the room and placed on a caisson. Well, not a caisson, it was more of a cart than anything. It was transported over to the railroad yard where it was loaded onto a railroad car and was transported to a port city, Le Havre, France, where there lay at anchor a very famous ship. It was Admiral Dewey's flagship during the Battle of Manila Bay in the Spanish-American War. It was also one of the last remaining ironclad ship of the American Armada that fought in that war. It was scheduled to be decommissioned after its voyage here. So what more fitting than to have this famous ship transport our World War I unknown across the ocean? Things went fine until they started to load the coffin aboard the ship. They didn't take into consideration the size of the coffin in relation to the size of the hatch of the ship. They couldn't get it inside the ship. So the captain wouldn't let them turn it on its side to get it in there because that would be disrespectful. So what he did, he instructed his carpenters to build a box that would be placed on the aft end of the ship in a portion of the ship that was known as the signal deck. The coffin was inserted in this wooden box, and the box was covered with waterproof canvas. Now, they felt like they might encounter some bad weather across the ocean. So they lashed it down, attached it to the deck, and the voyage started. Now, there was a contingent of Marines aboard the ship who were to stand honor guard on the voyage across the ocean. Well, it took a little while to get across, and as they were steaming across the ocean, well, it seemed that there was a hurricane that hit Florida in 1921. It came across, hit Tampa, and pretty much wiped Tampa out. They said the intensity of this storm, well, it was much greater than the recent hurricanes that we had.
Wow.
It came across Florida, hit the Atlantic, and changed course. It started on a northerly path. A typhoon was developing up above that. It was following a southerly course. Here comes the Olympia steaming this way, typhoon coming this way, hurricane coming this way. What's the difference in a typhoon and a hurricane?
Good
I
question.
don't know. It seemed to me they'd both be the same. But at any rate, that's their regard. At any rate, here we come. Perfect storm scenario. The Olympia is in the middle of all this. They said that ship was listing as much as 39 degrees port and starboard.
Ooh.
And I can't imagine what it was doing for now. Boy, would I ever be seasick.
Yes.
Quite obviously, the voyage was made successfully. Incidentally, the Marines who were supposed to stand honor guard on this wouldn't leave their post in all of that nasty weather. What they did was they reduced the size of the guard down to 2, and they would lash themselves to the rail of the ship. And when the relief came, they would untie them, hand the rope to them, and then they would stand, and the people that were being relieved would tie their relief to that, and they'd go back inside. So that's the way they made the voyage, tied to the rail. So we had some very wet Marines. At any rate, the voyage was successful, obviously. So we arrived at the naval yard. The unknown soldier was offloaded, and there was waiting a whole contingent of high-ranking folks. General Pershing was in attendance. He was loaded aboard, this time a real caisson, and was transported to the nation's capital, where he lay in state. Then, on November the 11th, he was taken to Arlington on a very wet, dreary day. But he was taken to Arlington, where President Harding officiated, awarding the unknown soldier the Medal of Honor. He was also given the Victoria Cross, which is England's equivalent of our Medal of Honor. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but in attendance at this funeral was a Native American Indian. His name was Chief Plentycoop. Now, he was, in his youth, he was something of a very fierce warrior. I mean, he really made notoriety in that regard. But he was also something of a diplomat. He spoke very fluent English and was, in fact, he even went to Washington to lobby for the Indian betterment or whatever. And it was, to a certain degree, was successful in those endeavors. So he was chosen to represent all Native Americans at that funeral. Now, he was told President Harding would be the only one to speak, but that went whoosh. He spoke in his native tongue, a very, very short eulogy. And after it was finished, he took his war bonnet that he was wearing, his lance, and his coup stick that he was carrying, and laid them on the tomb as a tribute from one warrior to another.
Very cool.
Now that war bonnet, the lance, and the coup stick are all on display in the museum there above the amphitheater. And we can see them today, as well as all of the medals of honor. That being said, the body was laid to rest 40 feet in the ground. Now, a lot of people think that the body is in that top tank. That is not true. And things were fine. The body was in the ground, the tomb was sealed. But in 1921, the only thing that you saw of that tomb was the bottom part of it. If you see the picture, I don't know if you can see well the tomb from here, but if we look at the picture, you'll see that there is a bottom section there, right here. This section here is the only part of the tomb that was there. Arlington at that time was wide open. I mean, you could access that cemetery from any one of three different directions. The placement of that tomb afforded a magnificent panorama. People would come to the park, I keep saying park. Well, Arlington Cemetery at that time was regarded pretty much as a park. So families would come for family outings to enjoy the scenery and to even have picnics. President Harding was coming through the park for one reason or the other. He might have been there to pay tribute to the unknown, I don't know. But he encountered a family that in fact was having a picnic. And guess what they were using as a picnic table?
Oh no.
Well, that didn't set very well.
Oh.
Now bear in mind that that tomb at the time was totally unguarded.
Oh no.
It was unmarked. It was just there.
Mm.
It didn't take long for a civilian guard to appear on the scene. Now, pay attention to the word civilian, not military. When the cemetery closed, he went home. It was not until 1937 that the Army took charge and began to guard the tomb 24/7. And now the Army was just Army. Just, it could have been cooks, or it could, chief cook and bottle washers, or heavy duty operators, or whatever. It was just a hodgepodge. But they did stand guard 24/7. Also, monies had begun to be appropriated for the added addition of this sarcophagus. Now, we all know how government wheels turn, right? Very slowly. It took 10 years. But after 10 years, we had enough money, so they went to a quarry in Colorado, in a town called, are you ready for this? Marble, Colorado. They carved out of that quarry a 72-ton block of marble.
Wow.
And they loaded that on a railroad car. Incidentally, as far as I know, even today, that hunk of marble it holds a record of being the heaviest piece of marble ever to be transported on a railroad car. So they shipped it up to Vermont, where the artisans up in Vermont, who were skilled marble carvers, actually carved out the corners that you see on the tomb there. And you will see them when we walk around the tomb. Now, on each side of the tomb, there are 3 reefs. They did not carve those reefs in Arlington. They simply left them in Vermont. They simply left squares where those reefs would be. So when they finished their work, it was loaded back on a railroad car and taken to Arlington, and there it was placed on the tomb, and the final carving was accomplished in place there at Arlington. Now, the tomb, as you look at it, that is actually the foot of the tomb. The head of the tomb faces east. That way, it's there by design, because they wanted to, when the sun rises in the east, they wanted it to shine down on the face of the unknowns. And tragically, I say tragically, but people today can't get around and see the head of the tomb. And on the head of the tomb, to me, is the most iconic things of the whole thing. There are 3 Greek figures that are carved there. Now, these Greek figures, each one, well, the first one would represent peace. She is holding a dove and extending that dove to the center figure, who is in turn holding an olive branch over to the third figure, who is a soldier, and he's holding a broken sword. And why a broken sword? Well, World War I was what? Supposed to be the war that
Ended the wars.
ended all wars. Well, that didn't happen, but that's why he's holding that broken sword. So if you put those 3 Greek figures together, symbolically, that could mean one could not have peace without the victory which is brought about by the valor of our soldiers. Peace, victory, and valor. Now, the badge that the guards wear today has the reef, and in the middle of the badge are those 3 Greek figures. Well, things were fine. We have our sarcophagus placed. We have it guarded. Oh, by the way, 1948 came around, and then the Army took charge again, but this time it is called the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment. That is the oldest regiment in the Army, hence the title Old Guard. And they are the ones who actually guard the tomb today. And they are there 24/7, rain, shine, sleet, snow. It doesn't matter. They do not leave their post. Some time ago, there were some hurricanes that came through Washington. They were told, because of the bad weather and everything, they could stand down. They refused that order. They said, no, we're not going to leave that tomb unguarded. So they have a walker out there during a hurricane. That shows you the dedication of these folks. Well, we have our tomb, and everything is going smoothly until December 7th, 1941. And we know what happened then. We found ourselves thrust into another war. 1945 comes around. There is a movement to have a World War II unknown soldier. Again, nothing could happen before 1950 comes. And in 1950, we found ourselves in a bit of nastiness over in Korea. So President Eisenhower, along with others, decided, well, we'll wait till the hostilities in Korea come to an end before we make a selection. And we'll do both of them at the same time, Korea and World War II. Now, the selection of the Korean unknown was a relatively simple process. It followed basically what happened in World War I. All of the casualties, generally from Korea, were laid to rest in one cemetery. That being the cemetery in Hawaii that's known as the Punch Bowl. So it's a simple process of exhuming 4 bodies from that one cemetery and making a selection, which happened. They did select one body to represent the Korean unknown and reinterred the remaining 3 right in that same cemetery. So we have our Korean War unknown selected. Now World War II was a totally different story. It proved to be almost a logistical nightmare. World War II was fought in 3 theaters, the Atlantic and the Pacific. All right, at that time we had something like 19 American military cemeteries across the world. There were 12 in Europe, 1 in North Africa, and 6 in the Pacific.
Wow.
Now, how in the world are you going to select one body from all of that? So what they did was very similar again to the World War I process. Of those 12 cemeteries in England and the cemetery in North Africa, they selected bodies. They transported them to Naples, Italy. Now why Naples, Italy? Well, there was a huge American military cemetery there. So just to make a long story short here, they selected one body from all of that and reinterred in that one cemetery there in Naples, those remaining bodies. So we have our World War II Eastern Theater selected. What about the Pacific? Same process. They exhumed bodies from those 6 cemeteries, and one body was chosen. And the rest of them were reinterred in the Punch Bowl. So now we have our representative body from the Pacific, we have our unknown from the Atlantic, and we have our Korean unknown selected. These bodies were then transported to Guantanamo Bay, where there was a Navy guided missile frigate waiting called the USS Canberra. So each body was placed on the deck of the Canberra. Now, if you can imagine yourself on the deck of the Canberra, if you look at your program, you'll see that there are 3 crypts in front of there. All right? Imagine those are 3 coffins. All right? The right hand one would be a World War II unknown. The left hand one would be a World War II unknown, and the middle one would be Korean War unknown. Now we don't know which theater the World War II representative bodies came from. They were mixed up, so we don't know. At any rate, there they are aboard the Canberra. She steams off the coast of Virginia. And there is a sister ship waiting at anchor there called the USS Blandy. Now, to make the selection of the World War II unknown, they chose a Coleman second class by the name of William R. Charette, a Navy guy, who had distinguished himself in Korea and had been awarded the Medal of Honor. So he was chosen to make the selection. And very similar to the World War I process, he was given a spray of flowers. But this time it was carnations, it was not roses. And the spray was in the shape of a star. So he took that and laid it on the right-hand coffin, not knowing what theater of operation that unknown came from. So here we have now our World War II unknown being selected, and we have a Korean War unknown. That left one left over. So what are we going to do about that? The chosen bodies from Korea and World War II were offloaded over onto the Blandy, and she steamed into the Navy Yard with those 2. The remaining body was left aboard the Canberra. She steamed out to sea several miles in about 150 fathoms of water. That remaining unknown soldier from World War II was getting a very ceremonial, formal burial at sea. Now, the two bodies that were left were taken to the Capitol, and incidentally, that's the first time in the history of the Capitol that two bodies had laid in state in a row time. Then the bodies were taken to Arlington, where the two crypts were awaiting them, with President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon officiating. They were given the Medal of Honor and were interred. Now, those medals of honor are on display, as well as the headdress and the lance and the coup stick of the Indian. They're all on display in that museum that's above the amphitheater there. Okay, fine and good. Everything went along very swimmingly until 1972. The bad guys up in North Vietnam decided we want to take South Vietnam. So there was a major offensive that took place in a little province there called Ad Loc. Now, there was a lot of military action going on, a lot of fighting happening, and there were two Air Force jets that were flying support and observation of all this mess that was going on the ground. One of those planes was shot down. The pilot, his wingman, saw those bullets, those missiles, impact the cockpit of the plane, and the plane rolled over, and it must have killed the pilot instantly because there was no distress call, there was no radio message at all. The wingman saw that plane impact the ground and saw it explode. He radioed back the coordinates where this happened. But because that was enemy-held territory, we could not get in there for approximately 5 to 6 months. You can imagine in the jungles of Vietnam, after 5 or 6 months laying there, what those remains might have been like. Yeah. Ironically, it was not U.S. forces that were able to get in there. It was a South Vietnamese patrol. Now, these guys did not speak any English. They couldn't read English. They were simply told that whatever they found, they determined to be not animal but human, they were to place in a box, a recovery box. Now, tragically, this box was not marked. Needs further investigation. No, it was marked unidentifiable.
They're stored. They have an online store.
They found portions of 4 rib bones, I'm sorry. They found a femur. They found part of a hip bone. And they found remnants of a flight suit. They found part of a flotation device that pilots wear when they're flying over water. It had the serial number of the aircraft on it. They found parts of a radio, a holster, and most importantly, they found a wallet containing family portraits and the identification card of First Lieutenant Michael Blassie. But again, these items were put in a box marked unidentified. They were shipped back to the Ad Loc headquarters, wrapped up, put on a helicopter the next day, and flown to the mortuary in Saigon, where, in a minute, when we get up there, I'll show you this. There was a skeletal diagram outlining the ribs and the femur and the hip. They also, took the remnants that they found and put them all in a box, and they shipped all of this over to the mortuary in, what did I say, Saigon? They went to Thailand first before it ever ended up over in Hawaii at the Central Identification Lab. There at the Central Identification Lab, by the way, when it was in Saigon, in addition to having the skeletal diagram, they put a label on the box that essentially said, better known as Lieutenant Michael Blassie.
Oh.
When it got to Hawaii,
it will be delivered directly.
Now, this is 1972 there. DNA was not, it was just very, very in its infancy. When it got there, they removed this label. And they did what is called a monophysiological analysis, which is really just guesswork.
I guess.
So, but through this process, they could determine the approximate age of the deceased. They could determine the approximate height and the sex of the deceased. Also, I mentioned that they found remnants of a flight suit. They found one single hair. And they ran an analysis on that hair and found out that the blood type of that individual was O negative. Well, the results of their bone analysis yielded these facts. The deceased was a person between the age of 26 and 33. He was approximately 65 inches to 71 and a half inches tall. And it was a male. The pilot that impacted the ground there in Adlock was 24 years old. He was 72 inches tall, and his blood type was A negative.
Oops.
Well, that did not match any criteria at all. So they said, fine, we have our unknown. So they put all this in a box marked X26. And being there at the punch bowl. Oh, by the way, they had also found some other remains later on. So we have four possible unknowns. They were all buried, and years went by. We come now to 1984. President Reagan had made a promise that there would be an unknown from Vietnam. Because of that promise and also pressure from the VFW, they exhumed these bodies. And they would choose one. And of course, they chose the X-26 and reinterred the other bodies. Now, this proved that the voyage to get it to the U.S. proved to be a multi-service endeavor. They loaded the remains aboard a Navy ship, guarded by Marines, to a naval air station where the Air Force actually took the body and flew it to Dover, Delaware, where the old guard, the Army, took charge.
Oh, wow.
And they transported this to Washington, where he lay in state until, it's time to put him over into Arlington. So they took him to Arlington and interred the body there. 1984. Okay. By this time, there were several families that said, we need to have this body exhumed. That might be my brother, my sister, my uncle, my aunt, my father, or whatever. They were refused. The reason being, if we go in there, we're going to have to move all those bricks, tear up that crypt cover, and dig down in there to get that. They were refused on that basis. Also, what if we do this and it turns out not to be who you say it is? So, for 14 years, they were refused. So by this time, the Blassie remains, well, years went by until 1998. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So in 1998, there was a POW MIA activist who himself had been a POW in Vietnam. Had been decided he had learned through the grapevine that these prisoners had communicated. There was a secret to the captors. He had learned through this grapevine of the crash that had happened nearby where he was being held captive. And he decided, he made it his work to do investigation into this to find out exactly who that was. And he interviewed many, many people. And one of the last people it interviewed was the wingman who had flown that mission and saw the aircraft go into the ground. And in the course of talking with him, he was interrupted by this wingman. He says, "No, wait a minute. I was a wingman on that flight. That is Michael Blassie."
Now, this is a product of the.
That is the first time Michael Blassie's name had been mentioned in all of those years. Well, he took his findings to the Blassie family. They petitioned to have that body exhumed. And again, guess what?
No.
They were refused. So by this time, 1998, from the onset, Blassie had been in the ground one way or the other for 26 years. So, because they were refused, Stampley's research had begun to be published. Several news media had picked up on that and were doing features, articles, broadcasts, or whatever, notably CBS News. As a result of this, the government changed its mind. So they okayed the exhumation. So Blassie's body was exhumed. His remains were taken. They had enough bone marrow from those bones in order to do a DNA test. Now bear in mind, this is 1998 now. So DNA had made great strides and had gotten much more improved and were able to almost inconclusively determine results. So it was taken to Walter Reed, the pathology department there. They did the DNA test, and yes, it was who they said it was. First Lieutenant Michael Blassie, United States Air Force. Now the Blassie family had closure. They had been kept in the dark for all this time.
Wow.
They were given the opportunity to have him buried at Arlington. But no, they wanted him close to home. Blassie was from St. Louis. Outside of St. Louis, there is a national cemetery known as the Jefferson Barracks Cemetery, and Blassie was laid to rest there. He was promoted posthumously, so to captain. So on his headstone it says Captain Blassie. Well, now we have him identified. How are we going to have an unknown? Well, I mentioned, there were other bodies. So they exhumed these bodies and ran the test, and crazy enough, two of them were Cambodians.
Oh.
Not even Americans at all. The other one, yes, was an American, but he was a professor from some college who was doing botanical research in the jungles of Vietnam.
Oh, no.
Lost and had died in the jungle. And his remains were found in an area in which later on it was a battlefield. So when they went in to get all this, they got his remains thinking he was a soldier.
Right.
But that's the way it happened. So today, that middle crypt, that Vietnam crypt, remains empty.
Oh.
Okay? And will probably always be empty. Because, as I mentioned, DNA testing today is so far advanced that there will probably never ever be another unknown. If one goes into the military today, they're going to take a DNA sample from you, and that will be entered in your medical record. And if something unfortunate should happen, they will be able to make an identification.
All the way around back up to the crypts.
Now, I'm not saying that it's not entirely possible that there will be, but it is highly unlikely. Okay. Any questions so far?
No. So then where is this crypt for the Vietnam?
I'm sorry?
You've got these three.
It's the middle crypt.
But I thought the Korean War.
I'm sorry?
I thought the Korean War was there.
No, the Korean War is here. This is World War II. Korean War in Vietnam. Now, we have, over here, we have sort of a pictorial timeline kind of thing that starts with Edward Younger, who was the one who made the choice in World War I. pictures of how he was transported to the Hotel de Ville, and how he was loaded aboard and how he was offloaded. Pictures of the actual cemetery that he was, of the funeral President Harding officiated. And so there is one picture that shows the rectangular opening, and a gentleman is holding his hand out like this. Well, that's General Pershing. And what he has had, they brought soil back from France, and what he's sprinkling that soil in the grave. Okay, and over here is just some, more displays. You can see a magazine that she's looking at right there that has a picture of the skeletal diagram that I mentioned earlier. Also a picture of Michael Blassie. All right, if there are any questions, I would invite you, Seth, to walk around and look at all these displays. Walk around the tomb, check out the head of the tomb, those three Greek figures. Okay.
Very cool.
Oahu.
Pardon?
I was in Oahu last year. I was over there. We went to Fishbowl.
Okay, so you know
We
what
walked around and they had like three unknowns in one grave. It was kind of sad. Really sad. But I can't remember the unknown soldier in Petrol, but I've got some pictures. I'm gonna look through and see it. We took a picture of that. It's got me interested now. Oh, we walked that whole cemetery.
I've never been. I really want to see it, but I'm sure it's gorgeous.
It's just like all the others, no matter where you stand. They're all
Straight
aligned.
lines. Yeah. Okay. Thanks
I'd
again.
like to go to River Flight with my uncle.
Okay.
Didn't know this.
Because
you're there. Fast trip.
Well, it always is. You don't get to see anything. At least the honor flight is there to take you to see it.
Fine. So.
That's good. Okay. All righty. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you.
See what my photo gallery looks like on my phone.
I'm sorry, I don't hear well. Too much jet noise here.
You should see what my photo gallery on my phone looks like.
Oh yeah?
We visit cemeteries.
He takes a picture of every military one we find.
Oh, I can imagine that's an extensive photograph
It's a
album.
lot of fun. I mean, the thing is that some of the occupations that they used to have, they don't have anymore.
Yeah.
You know, ammo trains.
Yeah.
Veterinarians.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Balloonist.
yeah. And what's crazy is some of the cemeteries I've been to, like it's got 14 headstones in there, 2 vets. They're out in the middle of, the godforsaken country, but that's where they were buried.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's-
generally, up to Vietnam, generally, soldiers were buried in the country in which they fell. They didn't start actually making a concerted effort to bringing them back until Vietnam.
And then, like up there at the Black Hills National Cemetery, we drive by it every time we go into the Northern Hills. I've got relatives that are buried up there. One of my bosses is buried up there. One of my nieces is buried up there now.
I thought this was your boss.
Oh, well, yeah, she's the living one.
Oh.
The dead one is in there.
Yeah, but I don't pay him.
Yeah.
Okay.
The boss
She
pays
just
him.
shoots at me. There's a difference,
Oh, yeah.
You're doing it wrong. Don't cock the gun, sweetie, please.
Yeah. All right.
But yeah, no. What happened is that both because of our government and my job, they said, well, we want you to go wander around into the countryside and talk to people, working for the census. And so I started seeing these neat places out in the middle of nowhere, and I'd show her pictures of these houses, and she's like, "You suck. I want to go with you."
I was working from home, so he likes history. I told him, pick a place, we'll go. He can tell me the history, I'll pretend to pay attention. Actually, you know, I pay more attention to him than I ever did my history teachers, but
Okay.
I won't say that I always get everything he says, but I do pay more attention to him than I do
Yeah,
anybody else. But, you know, and I get out of the house, he gets his history, so we both wait. Okay.
We saw the, well, I mean, there's also the Fort Meade Military Cemetery up there. We saw the one here in Alliance.
Yeah,
We found that one accidentally.
I just went to visit that cemetery. It's a neat little
It is a
cemetery.
neat cemetery.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And then, of course, there used to be one at Fort Robinson, but they yanked everybody up there and threw them over to the east side of the state, which I'm like,
We'll get there eventually.
eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. What's crazy is that a lot of these places that turned into ghost towns and stuff, you know, the cemetery is still there.
Yeah,
You got to hike a little bit to get back there to them, but you know.
they're there.
Yeah, we went to one that was in a town that used to be called Mason, and I guess the town was okay until the tornado destroyed the church. And they said, well, instead of rebuilding the church, we're just going to let the town die off. And
What was it, Mason?
Mason.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of like the order, but it's way up there between Hoover and Newell, way up in the northern hills. But then it also gets funny because I've seen some cemeteries where the road that's supposed to take you to the cemetery is more grown up than the grass on the side. You're like, where's the road? It's under there somewhere, you know.
Yeah, I hear.
We got a few that were
I
kind
had a
of.
presentation. It was fun.
Oops. I think I recorded pointing at the floor, but that's all right.
How many seconds do they hold from the next?
In a way, it's cool that there won't be another one, but it's also kind of sad.
Yeah, I know. Well, it helps with modern technology where you can identify people, so.
Like I said, it's one of those good, bad things.
USS Olympia hat, that's cool.
That is kind of cool.
Cruiser number 6.
I told my wife, I was saying, wife, I've not seen his wife, which one's grow. Are you all ready to go? On the tour? Okay. Have y'all been around to hear the tour today?
The museum tour? Oh, excuse me. I apologize.
Oh, this tour.
Yes.
Yeah, we were just in the back row over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is the project that we did.
Here's that cheese they were talking about.
Yeah, I saw that. That's really cool, though.
Yeah. Well, he understood the art of war and he wanted to pay his respects, which is understandable.
But we had this project and one other that won the national award for Americanism. And we compete against 630 of the clubs every year. But this one is by far the best one that we've done. This is half the size of the real tomb at Arlington National Cemetery. That includes the crypt covers you see here for the unknown soldiers of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Now, the artist that did all of our artwork and the guy that did up the building of our tomb had never seen the tomb. They did it in concert. So they did an incredible job. Now, the tomb in
Roman
1921,
figures.
when they buried did not look like this.
An olive branch, a Roman sword.
When I say down, the soldier is very.
I'm not sure I would have known that was a broken sword if you hadn't told me.
Yeah.
So cool. I just, you know, it's one of those things where I need more information, I guess.
All the unknown soldiers from World War I. And the way he was chosen, at the end of World War I, he created 4 American heritage cemeteries in France. They exhumed one unknown from each of those cemeteries, but there were remains in 4 identical flame caskets.
Salt and
Moved
fish.
the caskets around so nobody would know where they came from. And chose him by putting up a spray of white rose.
Celebrated his 102nd birthday in 1990.
Wow.
Oldest living American who had served in Congress.
Those 4 cemeteries, and they're still there today. Now, everything in the tomb is symbolic
was the first Allied regiment to reach the Rhine River. Got the Silver Star and the French War Cross. His sister Janet, who had been a nurse near the front lines, was later inducted into the French Legion of Honor for their wartime service.
Interesting.
That's kind of wild. Yeah, the 3rd U.S. Infantry. Materials used in constructing the tomb replica, wood, obviously. Can you imagine the weight of that block of granite?
No.
Well, that'd be crazy. Get your own miniature
That's kind of cool.
sculpture. Yeah. $20 donation. Lapel pins and it's kind of wild.
One Nation. Are these different or are these the same? No, those are the same. So you got the flag and then the One Nation. I was just curious.
Oh, that was a pretty cool program.
Yeah.
And these are items from your own,
Babes.
these are from the Military Museum here in town.
We actually been there. But of course.
She won't let me touch things like this because I
Go ahead.
make
I'm leaving.
friends.
I will leave you.